Let's talk about a strip of water so important. You can't really think of it as just a place on a map. It's more like the central artery of the entire global economy. And what happens when that artery gets clogged? Well, that's something the world is only just beginning to understand. So let's get right into it. I want you to start with this question. Just really chew on it for a second. What if 1/5 of all the oil that powers our cars, heats our homes, and runs pretty much every industry you can think of just vanished? Poof, gone. What would that world even look like?
Well, that question isn't some far-off hypothetical, because in early 2025, during a conflict in the Middle East, this is pretty much exactly what happened. We're talking fuel rationing in Europe for the first time in decades. In Asia, governments were actually shutting down universities just to conserve energy. And shipping traffic through this one critical point, it didn't just slow down, it collapsed by 95%. The stakes here are not theoretical. They are incredibly real.
So to really get how we got there, we first have to understand what the Strait of Hormuz is, where it is, and why this tiny, narrow passage holds such an unbelievable amount of power over all of us. Geographically, it's pretty simple, right? The Strait of Hormuz is the one and only sea passage from the Persian Gulf out to the open ocean, the only way out. And at its narrowest point, it's just 33 kilometers wide. That's about 21 miles. And that incredible narrowness, that's the whole key to its power and, of course, its vulnerability. The numbers that go through this thing are just staggering. It's almost hard to wrap your head around. Every single day, about 20 million barrels of oil pass through this tiny channel. That is nearly 1 out of every 5 barrels consumed on the entire planet every single day. And listen, it's not just oil. A huge 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas, or LNG, most of it coming from Qatar, it travels the exact same path. We're talking about the gas that heats homes and generates electricity all across Asia and Europe. So you put all that together, and you're looking at nearly $600 billion in energy trade passing through this one spot every single year. That's a number that's bigger than the entire economy of a lot of countries. And this brings us to a really crucial strategic term you hear a lot, a maritime choke point. See, it's not just that it's narrow. It's that perfect storm of high traffic, its narrowness, and, this is the big one, the complete lack of any real alternatives. That's what makes a choke point so incredibly dangerous. And this table just shows it perfectly. It puts Hormuz in a league of its own. Just look at these numbers. The Strait of Malacca is huge, but it has some bypasses. The Suez Canal, we all remember when that got blocked, but there is a viable, even if it's long, route around Africa. But Hormuz, it handles way more oil than any of them, and look at that last column. Bypass options are very limited. This is why it is, without a doubt, the world's #1 energy choke point. Okay, so this leads to the most important question. Who actually controls this waterway? And this is where things get really, really messy, because there's this massive gap between what international law says should happen and what happens in reality on the ground. So on paper, the answer seems pretty straightforward. There's this thing called the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS for short. It establishes something called the right of transit passage. And basically that just means all ships have the right to pass through international straits like Hormuz, and countries on the coast like Iran cannot legally stop them. But here's the dilemma. In reality, the shipping lanes go directly through Iran's territorial waters. Oh, and Iran? They never actually ratified that UN treaty. So while they can't legally close the strait, they don't have to. All they need to do is make it dangerous enough that insurance companies refuse to cover the ships trying to pass through. And just like that, you have a de facto blockade. Traffic just stops without a single law ever being changed. And look, this 2025 conflict was not some random one-off event. This has been building for a long time. The strait was first really used as a weapon during the tanker war back in the 1980s. All through the 2010s, Iran was repeatedly threatening to close it, seizing ships. The 2025 crisis was really just the most extreme version of a pattern that's been developing for over 40 years. So all of this leads to the most logical question anyone could possibly ask. If this one little strait is so incredibly risky, why on earth can't we just go around it? This bar chart tells the whole story in one simple picture. That big bar, that's the 20 million barrels of oil that have to go through Hormuz every day. And that little bar next to it, that's the absolute maximum capacity of every single bypass route combined. As you can see, it's not even close. Let's break that down real quick. There are basically two bypass pipelines. One in Saudi Arabia that can carry about 5 million barrels a day over to the Red Sea, and a smaller one in the UAE that carries about 1.5 million barrels. So together, that's just 6.5 million barrels a day, less than 35% of the total traffic. And here's the real kicker. There is zero bypass for all that natural gas from Qatar. If the strait closes, that LNG is going nowhere, period.
So what about our emergency supplies? You know, the strategic petroleum reserves that countries keep for exactly this kind of crisis? Well, they can act as a temporary cushion. They can buffer the shock for a few weeks, maybe a couple of months. But they're finite. They're a Band-Aid. They cannot replace that constant flow from Hormuz if there's a sustained long-term closure. So, all of this brings us to the big picture. That crisis in 2025 was a massive wake-up call. It revealed just how fragile our entire global energy system really is. So, where do we go from here? What happens next? Well, the truth is there are no quick fixes here. The long road to being less dependent on Hormuz really involves three huge efforts. First, transitioning to renewable energy, but that's a project that will take decades. Second, diversifying our oil and gas supplies away from the Gulf, but no other place on Earth can match the sheer volume. And third, just flat out reducing our demand through huge gains in energy efficiency. All of them are crucial, but all of them take a very, very long time. And I think this quote from one of our sources just sums it up perfectly. The 2025 conflict didn't create the world's energy security problem. It just revealed it. The vulnerability was always there, hidden inside the supply chains we all rely on every day. The conflict just pulled back the curtain and forced the entire world to stare right at it. So that leaves us with one last thought. We've just explored the most important 33 kilometers of water on the entire planet. But our modern world runs on countless invisible supply chains just like it. So the real question is, after seeing what happens when the most critical one of them all breaks, what have we really learned?